Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit on some work I've been doing recently um, with Jensen Ueda and Mark Wright at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, looking at leaf damage and defoliation from avocado lacebug in Hawaii. So the kind of the overall summary of this presentation is to try to give an idea of and try to give growers an idea of what to monitor in their trees and kind of be on the lookout for when they start to consider how they want to manage their trees and try to control this pest. So just kind of a quick overview of avocado lacebug. So it's a sap-feeding hemipteran insect with overlapping generations. So what this means, overlapping generations, just at any point in time, if you look at an avocado tree, and of course, if you see the notorious burn marks of their feeding, if you look on the underside, you're likely to find avocado lacebug individuals at various different developmental stages. So you might find adults, you might find nymphs, you might find eggs at any given point during the year. Sap feeding just points to the fact that they will, the main method in which they feed is to just suck out a lot of the plant sap or liquids within the leaves. So the lacebug is originally from Central America, but it was first described in Florida in 1919. Now, since it was around the early 2000s that it became established in San Diego County in California, and it's been kind of persistent there ever since. More recently, in 2019, they found established populations of avocado lacebug on Oahu, and since then, the lacebug has kind of spread to a lot of the other islands in the state, where it's kind of has grown prolifically. And basically, if you have an avocado tree, it's very likely that you have avocado lacebug on it. So just kind of looking, I'm going to be showing a lot of pictures of leaves, so just for forewarning everyone today. If you look at an avocado tree and you see these notorious burn marks where there's a lot of yellowing and brown, if you turn over that leaf, you're likely to find a few things, actually. You might turn it over and you might find actual avocado lacebug. So on the image on the right, it shows you what an adult lacebug looks like. It's got the wings and that have sort of this lace-like pattern that kind of gives it its name. But then you also may find the actual nymphal instars of the lacebug. And the nymphs or the juveniles go through four different developmental instars. So after each one, they get kind of bigger and bigger, though they do kind of look similar to each other. So you can kind of notice in the upper right image that you have, varying different sizes of juveniles. The red individuals here, the small red individuals, are likely first instars. The bigger red individuals, second instars, and then bigger than that, you get third. When you see these little clear sides on the bigger individuals, those are actually your fourth instars. And you can actually tell when fourth instars are about to molt into adults as those clear sides start to become white and opaque, like that individual on the bottom there. So another thing you might find are clusters of these black globules around, kind of generally compacted or clustered in a circle on the underside of this leaf. If you look a little closer, you might see that a lot of these black globules have these white little halos over them. So these are actually the eggs of the avocado lacebug. So the eggs themselves are the kind of the white halos that you see, and you can actually see a little bit on that right image at the very bottom. You can see kind of that cylindrical egg that doesn't have any of that black on it. The black is actually the frass from these individuals. So most of the time they will cover their eggs in their frass. This might likely be just to help protect the eggs, insulate them, and dissuade predators from eating them. Another thing you might find too is that you might see a heavily damaged leaf, turn it over, and not actually see anything alive on the underside. What you might just see is just these black, crusty spots on them. And this is actually all of the frass from these previous individuals. So it's basically telling you that there was once avocado lacebug there, but they have since either died or have developed to adulthood and have dispersed to the rest of the tree. So why is avocado lacebug becoming such an important pest in Hawaii? Well, the feeding injury from avocado lacebug can actually lead to early leaf drop in avocado trees. This has several different negative outcomes for the grower as well as the tree itself. Yeah, so talking about early leaf drop and kind of what negative outcomes can occur with early leaf drop. Kind of there are three big things. The fruit sunburn, which is just the fact that there are no leaves covering the canopy, and so these fruit are now exposed to UV damage. Another one is just slowed fruit development because the tree now has to reallocate resources to pushing out a new flush and vegetative growth. And then it can also lower flowering the following year. Now, these results haven't really been validated yet, though a lot of growers have observed a lot of these factors when they experience heavy infestations. And so this is just an example of what you can see when you have a not as heavily infested versus heavily infested tree. So the image on the left shows and this is also during flowering as well. And I think, yeah, actually this previous image does a better job. The tree on the left here was exposed to heavy infestation of avocado tree, and so it's lost a lot of its leaves, versus the tree on the right, which hasn't experienced a heavy infestation, and so it's kept a lot of its canopy. And this is just another example during flowering, where even without heavy infestation, trees tend to drop some of their leaves during flowering. When trees do experience heavy infestation, they tend to drop even more of their leaves when they flower. And so this is just an example with the tree on the left not having dropped a lot of its leaves, still retaining a lot of it, and the tree on the right kind of losing a good chunk of its leaves. So going a little bit into how exactly an avocado lacebug feeds on leaves and what exactly is it doing. And this goes back to them being sap-sucking insects. So the mouth part that they have is a straw-like appendage called a stylet. And what they'll do is from the underside of the tree, they will insert this needle-like, straw-like appendage into the leaf tissue and into plant cells, and they'll suck out all of the cytoplasm and kind of the non-vascular fluids in these plant cells. And so what they're doing is they're actually hollowing out these plant cells of all of the different fluids, and they're using that as a food source. And so you can kind of notice this on the image on the right, where it's showing kind of these different yellow spots. And if you look really closely, you can see that they're kind of these straw-like outlines of where it's putting the stylet into the leaf, hollowing out those plant cells, and then just kind of moving on to the next plant cell by that. And so when you get enough of this happening, you get these kind of larger yellow areas on the leaf. So this feeding, like I said, can initially cause this yellowing of the leaf, or chlorosis, where you start seeing these areas of just yellow on the leaves that kind of look like they've been burnt a little bit. This chlorotic tissue eventually dies and leads to areas of then necrosis, where these yellow areas then turn brown. And this is kind of where this early leaf drop starts to happen, is when these areas of necrosis become bigger and bigger. Then the odds of these leaves dropping from the tree increase more and more. So as these necrotic areas get bigger, you're more and more likely to see early leaf drop on these trees. So we see a lot of this damage, but how much damage can one avocado lace bug, or ALB, actually do? So to look at this, we put some newly hatched or closed individuals on these avocado leaf discs, and we raised them to adulthood just to kind of see how much chlorosis we could see on these leaf discs, and how much that could be attributed to just one individual. And these leaf discs were about the size of a quarter, about 1 inch in diameter. And we can see that on the left here, when we just have one individual, they don't actually do a huge amount of damage. But when you start to add up the individuals to 5, 10, 20, you really start to see growth in the area of this chlorosis as these individuals develop. And you can actually see too, as you get to, let's say, 10 or 20 individuals, the yellowing is kind of concentrated in an area. So it's not quite as spread out. And this has to do with kind of the gregarious nature of these instars, where these younger nymphs tend to kind of stick close to each other and feed closely to each other. So about 20 to 40 individuals is about how much one female will oviposit on a leaf. But you have to think that even 20 individuals, I mean, we can see from the image that the area of damage was still less than a quarter. And so this is just showing kind of that linear increase of area of damage as you increase the amount of nymphs on these discs. But even then, that area really isn't that big. So why are we still seeing so much damage on one leaf? And there are a few reasons for this, actually. The first reason is, well, this makes sense, is that you can have multiple females on one leaf. So this image right here just shows a lot of different females that have oviposited on the underside of this leaf. And you can actually see that all of these different egg clusters. So each of these different bunches of these black globules actually represents a different egg cluster oviposited by a female. And so you can think that, okay, if each of these females are laying, 20 to 40 individuals, and 20 individuals can make about as much damage as the size of a quarter, okay, we can start to see why we see so much damage on an individual leaf. But to add to this, lace bugs actually exhibit a very interesting reproductive behavior where the females will actually exhibit maternal care of eggs and nymphs. So when you turn over a leaf and you see eggs, freshly oviposited or laid eggs on the underside of these leaves, what you'll typically find is there's at least one individual hanging around by those eggs, and that's typically the mother or the female that's oviposited those eggs. And so this hasn't been shown with avocado lacebug, though it's fairly common in other lacebug species. They'll exhibit this egg or nymph guarding, where they'll just kind of stay around these eggs and kind of ward off different invertebrate predators or even sacrificing themselves to these predators so that their nymphs can live. Another interesting behavior is that these females will actually lead these newly hatched or eclosed nymphs to fresher sources of food. So when the nymphs actually hatch and eclose from these eggs, they start to feed heavily on the area right outside their egg cluster. And so very quickly that area becomes chlorotic and is basically used up. And what the mother will do is she'll actually lead uh, these nymphs over and kind of expand them out across the leaf to fresher tissue for them to feed on. And it's because of this too that the proximity or I was just mentioning that these lacebug will exhibit this maternal care that can actually greatly increase the chances of these individuals, these nymphs, reaching adulthood. So if these mothers or individuals are present around these egg clusters, it's much more likely that these nymphs are going to reach adulthood and keep feeding on these leaves. Another factor to consider too is just the environment. So these individuals like warm, dry, calm conditions. In fact, the figure right here is just showing the developmental time for these nymphs from eclosion or hatch to adulthood. And we can just see kind of how sensitive the development of these individuals is to cooler temperatures. When you have temperatures of, let's say, 20 degrees Celsius, that developmental time from hatch to adulthood can take as much as a month. Whereas if a 10 degrees increase in Celsius, that developmental time then goes down to about 8 to 10 days. And so in those sorts of conditions, they can develop very, very quickly, and the population can increase quite rapidly. So another interesting behavior that a lot of lacebugs just in general exhibit is how they oviposit their eggs. So if you've ever looked on the underside of an avocado leaf, and maybe you've seen this loose cluster of eggs, but maybe you've also seen this weird pattern where there's almost like a train of eggs on these leaves. And so these are actually two separate oviposition behaviors. So one is just the loose cluster, where it's typically just one individual female that's ovipositing these eggs. When you see these trains or these lines of eggs, this is what's been referred to as egg dumping in other lacebug species. And basically, what will happen is one female will oviposit these eggs, and then another female will come over and will basically oviposit her eggs next to the other oviposited eggs. And then that female will typically just leave. And this typically happens when the initial female is egg guarding or exhibiting that maternal care over these eggs. So what they think is happening here is that these second mothers or these individuals that come in after the initial female, they oviposit their eggs, but then they don't have to spend time guarding these eggs. And so that actually frees them up to then leave and go oviposit more eggs somewhere else. And so it's been shown that for other lacebug species, that the female that initially oviposits the eggs and is egg guarding doesn't oviposit or lay as many eggs as the females that do this egg dumping, where they drop off a few eggs here and then they go and lay more eggs somewhere else. These individuals actually end up ovipositing more eggs over their lifespan. And so these images here just kind of show an example where you have one individual female in a certain amount of area that's laid maybe 40-ish eggs. But then with egg dumping in that same area, you can see as many as 180 or more eggs. And so we can see how that can then quickly lead to the accumulation of a lot of damage on these leaves. So when exactly does egg dumping occur? So egg dumping seems like an important factor to consider because that's a lot of eggs on one leaf. Um, so to kind of address some of this, we can look back at some surveys that we had done back in 2022 to 2023, looking at just the per leaf nymph abundance. So basically what we did here is we collected leaves from different Kona Charwell trees, and we took them back to the lab, and then we just counted lots and lots of bugs on them. And we looked at the relative number of these lace bug nymphs. And what we found was that there do appear to be kind of seasonal changes in the abundances that we find on these leaves, where between October and March, you find a kind of a surge in the abundance of these lace bug nymphs. And I say this with a little asterisk because this is for Kona Charwell. So it could be that these abundances or these surges in abundances might be slightly different depending on what variety you're using. But we've also found that during these surges, that's when you're most likely to find this egg dumping behavior. So I say that, but at any given point in the year, you can still find the egg dumping behavior. It's just more prominent during this October to March period. And we think that this might be related to the phenology of the trees, kind of as they're um, reserving resources and kind of getting ready to flower in March and April. Okay, so I've talked a lot about what the lace bug are doing. Now I just want to go through and kind of, I'll have to speed through this for time, but just kind of looking at how the progression of leaf damage can tell you different things about the stage of infestation on your tree. So for example, uh, leaf these three examples that you might find that show various degrees of lacebug damage, these are kind of telling you different things in terms of what's going on these leaves and what could be going on in your canopy too. So I'm just going to show you some cartoon diagrams of what might of these kind of different stages and kind of the progression of this damage. And then it shows you kind of the underside, what's going on with the lace bug on the underside of the leaf, and then what you're typically going to see if you look at your tree on the top side of these leaves. So the first thing that's going to happen is that these females are, after they've mated, they're going to disperse onto the underside of these trees, and they're going to do kind of some scouting. So they went to their feeding, but they're also testing to see if this leaf is an adequate food source for their offspring. And so what they're going to do is they're going to walk around and they're kind of going to sample this leaf. And so what this will look like is when you look at the top side of your leaf, you might find these little yellow dots on them. And this is actually a good example right here of a leaf where you see lots of little yellow dots, and they're not quite collected or concentrated. This is likely damage coming from an adult, and typically an adult female that's trying to determine if this is a good leaf to oviposit eggs on. So the next progression is that you get this oviposition and eclosion or hatching of the individuals. So this is where the female decides to oviposit eggs on the leaf, and they'll typically insert the leaf and attach it to the underside of these leaves, and she'll put it in these kind of loose clusters. Then after time, the individual nymphs will eclose from these leaves and start to feed around those egg clusters. So kind of as I mentioned before, these nymphs exhibit this gregarious behavior when they're young. So they really want to stick together. And so what that'll look like is this very concentrated yellowing on top of the leaf. And basically what it's almost like a bullseye to showing you where that egg cluster is. And so this is the same leaf now, but I removed that white circle. This is kind of what you're going to see. You're going to see this really tight collection of yellow dots. So it almost looks like just a blob of yellow. And at the middle of that is where you'll typically find the egg cluster. The next kind of progression is that you get this growth and expansion. So this is where these nymphs are now, they've been feeding for a little bit and they're starting to get bigger. They've exhausted the food source around their egg cluster. And so they start to kind of expand away from the egg cluster. And this is where that maternal care kind of comes into play again, where the female, the mother will actually kind of direct them away from the leaf to this new source. So here, this is kind of what you'll see here is just, this chlorotic area is getting bigger. And this is when you'll start seeing necrosis at the center of this yellowing. And so this is kind of an example of what that would look like. This yellowing is getting bigger, but you're starting to see signs of this necrosis. So this is typically a sign that these lace bug are typically at a later, the nymphs at least, are at a later stage in their development and are starting to kind of disperse away from the center of this chlorosis. So the next one is just adulthood and dispersal. So again, the nymphs are getting bigger. They're entering their last life stage or even entering adulthood. So they're going to be kind of closer to the edges and away, getting further and further away from this yellowing and necrosis. And eventually, once they reach adulthood, they're going to disperse to other leaves or maybe other trees. So at this point, the individuals are actually fairly spread out and are spreading themselves out. And again, what you'll see here is just the yellowing, the chlorosis is just getting bigger, but it's not actually, well, it's big, but it's not getting any bigger. And this is when the necrosis, that necrotic tissue is kind of starting to take over. So this is an example here where the individuals have likely reached the end of their development, and it's really that necrosis that's starting to kind of take over. And then kind of the last thing that you see, the last progression, is that these individuals have dispersed away from the leaf, and so that yellowing isn't getting any bigger, but the necrosis is kind of starting to set in and kind of starting to take over all that chlorotic tissue. And so for this, if you turn these leaves over, you'll likely just find the black dots that are the frass of the lace bug. And so that's what this example looks like. So we can see that there's not really a lot of yellowing around this brown. It's mainly just brown. And so this is saying that whatever lace bug we're feeding on here have likely finished their development and have moved on. And so this, if you turn this over, there's likely no individuals here anymore. But of course, things aren't always that simple. Leaves can actually experience varying types of damage simultaneously. And this has to go back to these insects having overlapping generations. Sometimes females of a future generation will come back to a previously infested leaf and oviposit their eggs on it. So this is an example here where you have some yellowing with the necrosis in the center. And then let's say the upper part of this leaf, you kind of have the beginnings of that oviposition and the female scouting. And this is just another example where you have the growth of this chlorotic area and the necrosis within that. But then if you look elsewhere, you can kind of see these little concentrated areas of yellowing. Those signify that these are new egg clusters coming in. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about what the lace bug does, what to kind of be on the lookout for in terms of damage. So in terms of, if you say want to manage for these insects, what to be on the lookout for, you really want to try to look and see when these early progressions of feeding begin. So when they start to get to the scouting and kind of seeing this can be a little difficult, but it's much easier to be able to see this when there's that cluster of yellowing, but very minimal necrosis. That typically means that these nymphs have kind of are freshly closed, and that is when they're tightly clustered together, and that's probably going to be your best chance of actually killing them with product, is when they're not as dispersed away from each other. Okay, so now when would management be most critical? So this is kind of the pinnacle of you know what uh, uh, what why I'm talking to you today about this is just how exactly can we potentially manage for these. And I just want to point out an extension paper that was published by Jensen and some people from UH at Manoa that gives a really nice exhaustive list of just the conventional and organic insecticides that can be used against avocado lacebug. And they've done actually a really good job at looking at the different efficacies of, of these various different products, and even give recommendations on rotations for pesticides. Um, so I should say too, so because it's a fairly recently invasive species, um, we don't know of the presence of a lot of natural enemies that can actually just kind of naturally control these populations. And so for the time being, it does seem that kind of pesticide use seems to be the most effective way to control these populations. I say this though, knowing that trying to control these populations year round is really difficult because I've heard a lot of growers say that they'll go and they will spray the underside of their trees with these products, and within like a week, the avocado lace bug are back. And this is likely due to dispersal from neighboring uh, uh, untreated trees, and they're basically dispersing back in. And so trying to control for this year round is going to be really difficult, both logistically and financially. And then, of course, it raises the question of just, okay, when do I need to manage these leaves? If how much leaf drop can my tree have before I start to see yield loss? And unfortunately, that's a little unclear at the moment, just due to the various variables. But it is actually something that this is actually part of a larger project that we're doing, trying to actually pinpoint leaf drop to yield loss. And so what I just want to emphasize here is that, so if you don't want to try to control for them year round, some things to be on the lookout for, and maybe when management might be most critical, is when you start seeing changes in the oviposition. And so what this might mean is that, if you go out and you go to monitor your leaves and your trees, and you start seeing these changes from these loose clusters to now you see these really long lines of black on your leaves from this egg dumping, that could signal a surge in abundance in these canopies. And if this is true, then it could lead to the rapid accumulation of damage and leaf drop in your canopy. And so this might indicate that, okay, this is a time that I need to manage for these trees to keep this population in check. And I'm seeing a lot of good questions in the chat, and I'll address those once I get past these slides right here. Another factor that I just want to mention too that I've seen that's really interesting is that you want to monitor for large differences in infestation between your trees. And this is particularly true for different varieties. If you notice that they do seem to have preference for one of your varieties over another, the reason for this is basically what will happen is one of your trees might go relatively untouched, while as an adjacent tree might get heavily infested. And basically what that's doing is it's building up this lacebug adult population in this infested tree. And once they kind of eat through a lot of those leaves and cause this defoliation, they're basically just going to hop over to that adjacent tree. And now this adjacent tree is getting just surged with this high adult population. And this can actually lead to really rapid damage accumulation. And sometimes what you'll see is just the leaves have just gone completely yellow. And this is just due to the sheer number of individuals that have now dispersed onto this tree. And so, this is another kind of dynamic that you might want to be on the lookout for, because this could also indicate kind of a surge in infestation in your trees. Okay, so that was the last of those slides, and I just want to thank the USDA, RCUH, Western SARE, which is kind of funding a lot of this project, and a lot of people at PBARC for making this possible, and all the help that they've been doing for this. And yeah, so let me go ahead and stop sharing real quick.